Hey guys, welcome to Heal with Sarah. This is a channel for raising your consciousness, healing emotional wounds and traumas, and navigating the human experience, which I think that we are all coming to terms with the fact that it isn't necessarily an easy one, and it's definitely not a straightforward one. So I am very excited to be sharing some wisdom with you guys. I have a cup of tea and I have my water, and I recommend that you guys do the same. I just wanted to make sure that we are nice and grounded before going into this topic because it is one that means so much to me, and if you're watching this, it probably means a lot to you. Okay guys, so this video series is going to be broken down into two parts. And the first part, or one part, is going to be depression and managing that in more practical and external ways. So external in the sense that habits and routines and lifestyle, these kinds of things that you can actually do and take action on. And then there's going to be a video, which is this video, on internal. So my internal approach to depression. And when I say internal, I really mean some mindsets and perspectives and questions that I asked myself when I was in a state of depression, and these were things that really helped me. So for me, depression was very sad, and it was really a lot of crying. It was a blend of sadness and anxiety, but I really do feel like sadness and negativity and hopelessness and feelings of defeat and like a very kind of negative image of myself, a negative image of the world, was very strong in my depression. And I also remember feeling like I was really suffocated by my depression. So even the way that I talk about depression, I say it's like it's my depression, as though it is something external. And because I've had different bouts of depression, I do remember that there were some where I was so unconscious, I was just so in it, and as depressed as I was and as aware as I was, I kind of just let it happen, and I was floating by throughout it without too much awareness. But honestly, my worst depression for me was the most recent kind of period, and that was with a lot of anxiety, and I really knew I was depressed. It was really like depression fully came at me and took up so much space in my inner being and in my mind and in my emotions, and I really felt like depression was invasive, and it just hijacked my entire system, my entire operating system. The way I thought, my beliefs and all of my hopes and my dreams, everything just became so negative and so hopeless and so bleak, to be honest. And another thing was that I just kind of want to say was, I remember in the most recent period, the depression was really hard because I was so aware that I was depressed. And this really coincided with my spiritual awakening, which, ultimately just means like a massive amount of awareness about everything. For me, at least, that was my experience. So after, kind of my spiritual awakening, I really fell into a very deep depression. And it was in this space where I had never been more aware of my own suffering, and I had never been more aware of my own misery. And honestly, I think that that's why this kind of period of depression was so bad, and it was so painful, because not just because I was experiencing pain, but I was watching myself experience pain. And it didn't make any sense to me because I had no direct reason to feel sad. And honestly, what made me even more depressed was being so aware of everything that was happening, everything I was feeling and thinking, knowing how irrational it was, and still feeling really suffocated by it. And that's really it. I felt so trapped within myself. I feel very suffocated by my sadness. But in order for you to feel suffocated by something, that must mean that you are not it. As suffocated as I felt by my sadness, I was still aware that I was the one experiencing it. And so that is where I think this was kind of a stepping stool. So this was honestly my first tip, is framing your depression as that. It is a depression. You are in a valley and a lower point in your life, if you will. And it may be ugly, it may be messy, and it may be painful, but it's not you. It's just something that you are experiencing. And this is another thing I really want to clarify before I talk about, lifting depression or removing depression or healing depression. For me, it's not so much a removal process as much as I thought it would be. And this is very interesting because while I was still totally in that depressed mode, I was only willing to accept any forms of healing or resources or any forms of help that would make me stop feeling like this ASAP. So something I've noticed about depression is that it's very stubborn. It is very also lazy and stubborn. It only wants a miracle cure. And that's how it was for me, because I know people would say meditate and do this and slowly get yourself out of it. I was not open to that whatsoever. I was actually very closed to it, and I didn't think that was a possibility. And if it was, I don't care, because I was shutting out the world, and I was only willing to put effort when I knew it would save me. I was looking for a savior. I was looking for someone to pull me out of it. And something I really want to clarify is with these tips, at least, I've noticed that for me, how I really shifted out of my depression was by shifting out. So I changed my perception of myself and my depression, and given the understanding that I'm not my depression, which is why I wanted to clarify before, I had already understood that there was a very big gap between me and my depression. Don't get me wrong, it still loved to get all up in my face, all up in my triggers and my thought patterns, but I still saw it for what it was. And this is what allowed me to, at the turning point, with all these tips, develop a relationship with my depression. And this kind of ties into my next point, which is, I know that depression can be very painful, and sometimes it can be so painful for people that they decide to take their lives. And although I personally was never really suicidal, I do remember very strongly feeling like I just don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be in this state anymore. And that is tip number 2. Asking myself, was it really my life that I want to end, or was it how I'm feeling? Was it the depression that I wanted so badly to lift and just get away from me, So what worked for me was stepping aside and saying, okay, hold on. So I know I feel like shit, and I know I don't want to feel like this anymore, but just to be clear, it is this feeling, it is this experience, especially when it comes to a topic like depression. Whatever it is that you are doing to get yourself through another day, you're doing absolutely amazing. You really are. And I'm saying this from experience. And it might feel like shit. And you being aware of feeling shitty may not make it go away, but it's nice knowing that that's not really you. For me, it gave me a sigh of relief knowing that I'm not my depression. And although I may not know exactly when it will decide to lift, at least I know that this is temporary. Okay guys, so this is a question that I asked myself that I very strongly remember asking myself this when I was deep in my depression. And this is at the point where I honestly, I got used to being depressed. I was dealing with it for a couple years, so I already knew what my days looked like. This was at the point where I was living with my depression. I wasn't just accepting the fact that I felt it. I remember brushing my teeth and thinking about how depressed I was and thinking about how crappy I felt for still being depressed. This was a big theme in my depression, where I remember even just being depressed, waking up another day and being depressed, was an automatic failure because I felt that heaviness in my heart. I woke up and I felt the dread. I woke up and I felt the anxiety, and all of a sudden I was like, okay, here we go again. It's almost as though I was waking up and hoping that it would lift, and I would peek out and ask, check, feel it, and then I would feel the depression, and that would confirm that I'm still depressed, that I'm still failing, because this was some kind of mindset that I had developed after living with depression for a certain amount of time. I thought that I was still a failure because I couldn't find some way to get rid of it. And I had seen therapists, tried medication, all that stuff, and it wasn't lifting. And I was just thinking about my depression and thinking about how crappy I felt that I hadn't been able to figure out how to stop feeling this way. So I was brushing my teeth and I was like, wait, if my goal was to wake up happy and wake up not depressed, then I failed. Because then I was thinking more, and then I remember thinking like, wait, so if I woke up today and I was hoping to feel depressed and I was hoping to feel sad, and that was my idea of success, then technically I had a successful day. And I just remember brushing my teeth in the mirror, and for a moment I felt this like lift off my chest, like that, just for a baby second, the depression lifted, and I was like, okay, like, hey, I'm a success. I was depressed today. Like, okay, interesting. So that was a very big pivotal moment for me, because I realized that this subconscious belief that, you know, my day is a good day if I experience feelings of goodness. This was a belief that my depression totally interrupted, because my depression just barged right in and frigged some shiz up, took away, you know, my ability to feel peace and joy, to feel good about myself. And so, you know, based on that subconscious pattern that I was still kind of following unknowingly before that moment of brushing my teeth, I would have still gone on thinking that I'm a failure because this depression is still present within my sphere of existence. So as soon as I shifted my perspective to, okay, so maybe judging my day and my life based on whether or not I feel depressed or not is not something that's really working for me, because I knew at that point that my depression was present. The heaviness in my heart and the sadness was present. What if I could find some sort of loophole in my depression? Now that I kind of was aware of this like subconscious belief of mine, if I know I've been dealing with just this depression for a while and it doesn't seem like it's really going anywhere anytime soon, what if I could make this depression like my new ground zero? Because I noticed that when I was depressed, what I would do a lot of the time, most of the time unconsciously, was fantasizing about all those times when I was living without the depression. And that is why I think I felt like those feelings of failure and defeat just by experiencing depression were so strong, because once again I was so just not okay with this depression being in my sphere. It was only when I decided to change my thinking into becoming more accepting of living my life with depression and that kind of being my new normal, that honestly gave me some relief, because I wasn't waking up anymore and trying to be this happy-go-lucky version of myself that I had been for the past, you know, like 18 or 19 years. So when I kind of let go of trying to go back to normal and tried to accept that this, you know, for a period of time would be my new normal and I would have to find a way to kind of manage it, that is when the wheels really started to turn for me. I even remember going to bed and thinking, like, based off of the switch that I had made, like thinking, hey, I made it another day with depression, with sadness. That was a success. So I basically kind of tried to switch up what my measurement of success and happiness was. And honestly, this was not like an easy thing, and I don't want it to come across that way. It was not something that like my mind or my ego or any part of me really believed. It was like, really, Sarah? You're okay with being depressed? Okay, let's see how long that works for you. That is like literally how my mind was. But after I made that mental shift in my approach to my depression, like things really, really started to change. And it's also like even thinking that I could decide what my version of happiness was and what my version of success was, and that was very transformative for me because, you know, I think that a lot of us, when we're depressed, we just feel so depressed. We feel like we really are in this separate world from everyone else. It's that contrast between what our depression feels like and looks like compared to what we're supposed to look like. That really is like adding salt to the wound, because you're already experiencing depression. For you to like place shame on top of your depression is you adding another layer of negativity and emotions against yourself. So that also wasn't really helping me. This question of, okay, well, if your goal was to be happy today, then are you failing? Are you succeeding? Or if your goal was to be neutral and strong and make healthy choices, or just get out of bed, or put on another pair of sweatpants other than the ones you've been wearing for the past 3 days, like, you know, switch up the standards to success for yourself. And especially in depression, habits, routines, lifestyles can go out the window so fast because you really are living in a different world. At least that's how it was for me. So congratulate yourself on everything and anything that it is that you can and do. Another little depression hack that I found was, so this was near the tail end of my depression stage, which was in total about like 1 to 2-ish years. You know, for the second year I had already kind of found out how to live with depression, and for me that's like so many breakdowns and like so much sadness throughout the day and like wanting to cry literally all the time. And so I was like just waiting for the depression to lift, praying, crying. I just realized I didn't know how to fix my depression, and I realized no one else really did either. I just didn't know what to do with myself anymore. I didn't know what to do with my depression because my life, you know, my external life in the sense of like me moving forward in my life and enjoying my life and socializing and thriving, like my actual living had been on pause for that entire 1.5 years. I wasn't eating the best, I wasn't taking care of myself, I was trying to be as unconscious as possible because I didn't want to be really present, so that I had to feel everything and hear my thoughts and just listen to them shit on me all day. And so I got really kind of frustrated with the depression, and I started kind of thinking like if my life was always going to be like this, and whether or not I would be able to make peace with it. So I remember thinking, if I'm going to be depressed, I might as well be depressed and successful, because right now my depression is affecting my ability to do well in school. It's affecting my ability to like work and be like, you know, the best employee that I could be. Like, okay, if I'm going to be depressed, I'm going to be depressed and successful. At least if I have a job that I don't hate, then that will make my depression easier, right? So now this perspective shift that I had where I was thinking, okay, so this depression isn't going anywhere, right? And I still have shit to do. Like, the person that's experiencing the depression and suffering still wants things, and I still want to create a life, even if I'm going to be miserable in it. I might as well have a good life and be miserable. Like, I was really thinking of the quote, like, I would rather cry in a Mercedes than on a bicycle, or something like that. And coming to this point really helped me. I wrote this down. This helped me separate my depression a bit from my actual real life capabilities, and it gave me permission to get things done. And that's absolutely true, because I do find that when you're depressed, it's like it sucks everything out of you. So for me, you know, like my skincare routine, out the window. My eating routine and trying to eat healthy, out the window. Exercising, out the window. So that was in my depression, when I was mentally like in my depression, you know, when I thought I was my depression. But now we're getting to the point where I was like, okay, so I'm living with depression. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of my decisions and behaviors have to be reflective of the state of depression. And so this was a very pivotal moment in my healing journey, because this is where I created distance between me and my depression, but even more importantly, I created distance between my behaviors. I separated the potential of my life and I almost reclaimed what my life could be, still accepting and acknowledging the fact that this life may coexist with depression. And what this really did was it gave me permission to reclaim a potential for myself. It really gave me permission to take part in activities and habits that would contribute to the creation of my ideal life. And this is really important because you have to understand that the mental state I was in when I was letting go of my healthy habits, because my depression was so interrupting me from doing those things, that was when I was still very overwhelmed by the experience of depression. I was still getting a grip on what the heck was happening, why in the world I was so sad. And at that point I wasn't, like, I fully respect the point I was at for the very beginning of my depression. I wasn't able to reflect and process what I was able to process like a year and a half into my depression. So I also want to make that clear. Okay, so I wrote this down. This perspective shift allowed me to honor my depression while also allowing me to be productive. Yes, so I do remember that when I was depressed, I always thought about, would my life be like this in 10 years? Sorry if it's noisy, but would my life be like this in 10 years? Because I just was not willing to accept being depressed for 10 years. I was not willing to accept depression taking my 10 years of my life from me. And I wasn't as empowered as I am speaking now, by the way. These decisions were made like mid-cry, mid-meltdown, in the shower, like my 10th meltdown for the day, and it was just at the point where it's like, I can't live like this forever. And if I have to live like this forever, I don't want to live like this forever. I'd rather have a good life with depression, and I mean like on an external, like materialistic job, 3D aspect. Like I'd rather have the organization of my life be good. Number 3 was I stopped calling a bad day, a bad week, or one moment of weakness or a moment of depression. And this was major for me because, like I said, I was in my state of depression for 1.5, maybe 2 years. When you kind of start to really understand and come to terms with the fact that you are experiencing depression, it can be very tempting to make that an identity out of yourself. And it really happens like kind of, I think, without you fully realizing it. That's how it happened for me, at least, because once again, like I said, I was living my life the way I wanted to, and I was just living my life, and then depression hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was such a shock to me and such a shock to my system and my life and my routine that like everything, it fell away so quickly, like my habits, all of that stuff. And okay guys, so I wrote this down. I remember I got to the point where I was the one enforcing / imposing my depression on me before I could even give it a chance to suffocate me. It's like I was asking for it as a label, identity, or egoic reason not to step out of my comfort zone. So that's really true. I got to the point where I think a 1.5 years in, it wasn't so much depression the way it was at the very beginning. It wasn't as overwhelming to me. It was still very difficult, painful, ugly, not wanting to experience it. All of that was still there, but I had kind of come to terms with it, and I felt like at this point I was really living with depression. And it's not like depression was living with me, which was true as soon as it hit me. But I stopped calling one bad day, one bad week, or a meltdown back at square one. And that was pivotal for me because I noticed that every time I would make some form of progress in my mood or my thoughts or the amount of hope I had about the world and what my life could be, as soon as I kind of had, I felt like I was making progress and I was healing from my depression, as soon as I would have one trigger or one meltdown or one bad day, or even like something crappy happens, I would like fall back in depression. And it really was like, I felt like at that point, like looking back, I was the one that was falling back into depression. It wasn't depression that was pulling me back in. it was, it really was in the very beginning. But near the very end, I was falling back in, and it's almost like I was imposing and enforcing that depression label and identity and life that I was living for a year and a half. I put that label back on. As soon as I saw that, like, any form of progress that I had made that day or that week was, like, erased. And that is something that is really unhealthy, and I think that could extend the time period of our depression state for much longer than it really needs to be. So I did find near the very end it was a label of depressed that I was holding on to. And this was really, really hard for me to come to terms with. Okay, guys, so to wrap this point up, I started to recognize a moment of sadness or healing as just that, a moment of sadness or a moment of my depression. And, be wary of the temptation to label yourself as that, as depressed, because you could save yourself another 5 weeks of depression by brushing off a bad moment. And that is what I really wish, if I could go back and tell myself anything, that's what I kind of wish I would say was, don't be so quick to throw yourself in the pit before it even tries to pull you in. Because it's true. It's like I had given up before I had even allowed myself to make any progress. This is a really good segue into my next point, which is I felt as though near the very end I was the one that was perpetuating my own depression. Like, I have a theory about depression, at least one aspect of it, because it is so complex, and I'm not trying to grasp it in its complexity. I'm just trying to speak my truth here. But we get depressed when we see what it is we want out of life and ourselves, but we feel the distance between where we are on our journey now and how far away it is so great. And that distance between, like, the depressed version versus who it is we want to be, it feels so far. And then it is our self-doubt that is triggered because it doesn't think that we, at the point we are now, could ever make it to the point that we want to be. And because that distance is so great, I felt like the version of myself that was free of depression, living her best life, or not even, just like living a non-depressed life, I felt like that girl, that version of myself was so far away. And for me to even embark on the journey of entering that version of myself, like, it made me feel like it was impossible. And you have to understand that when you're depressed, your immune system is probably shot, but your self-esteem, your confidence, your courage, mine was out the window completely. I think that, getting to the point near the very end of my depression where I kind of felt like I was oscillating between depression and, like, normal-ish living, I felt like those were the kind of two, like, realities I was switching back and forth between. I think that because I was starting to experience more of a happier life or moments of clarity away from depression, honestly, you guys, I think that scared the shit out of me, because I was living with depression for a year and a half. I was living with no responsibilities. I was living with a poor lifestyle. I was getting away with not studying, not taking care of myself. Like, I was getting away with so much when I was depressed, and for good reason. I'm not taking that away. I'm just saying that when I was a year and a half in, it was like that, like, I was still kind of living in the comfort of depression and the comfort of laziness and the comfort of giving up. But as soon as I kind of was starting to branch out and, like, I would get little peeks behind the curtain of a non-depressed life, I would get scared, because I had learned, for a year and a half to find so much comfort and safety and security within my depressed little hole depression pit that I was in. And that safety and, combined with feeling like, happiness is still quite far away, and feeling like, living in my depression was just safer, I was almost, like, really scared about living without depression. And this really is a little bit of Stockholm Syndrome here. I really think that that's absolutely the truth from my experience, where near the very end of my depression, when I was starting to live with it, when I was starting to get comfortable in that lifestyle of victim mentality, of negativity, defeat, those are all like it takes zero almost resistance to take part in those things, right? It's hard, like negativity is easy to take part in. It's hard not to take part in it, right? So I think near the very end, I kind of saw that, like subconsciously, I was starting to get scared because I was like, shit, we may not be depressed forever. Who am I if I'm not depressed anymore? And I felt like at that point, I was getting so used to thinking so poorly of myself that for me to try to better myself and better my life was like so much effort. So much more effort than I had been putting into anything for the past year and a half. And now that I felt like I was starting to become like more present and living with that, it honestly made me want to be depressed again, because at least I felt safer there. At least I knew what I was going to be sad and miserable about. So my depression got to the point where I was really scared of what my life would look like without depression. And I fell into depression, especially after like my spiritual awakening, which just stripped out any form of identity I thought I had. It took that away. So falling into the depression was quite nice, if anything, in one aspect, because at least it gave me an identity. And after being depressed for about a year and a half or 2-ish years, that really did become my identity. That was the life I was living. That was the reality I was living in. And so that was a big ego trap, because I felt safer in the identity of a depressed girl than a girl that had just everything she thought what she was stripped away. So what I'm trying to say here, I guess, is that it was safer to be depressed, or at least, listen, I just wanted an identity. If that means I'm going to be a depressed girl, I'll take it. I would have rather been a depressed girl with that label than a girl that didn't know who she was and really wanted to know who she was, but everything she thought she was had just been taken away from her, because that's kind of how my spiritual awakening felt, to be honest. So it was in this part of me that I was wanting to be something, even if that something was depression. And that is, a major lesson that I think I learned. And I think that that's why I feel very confident sharing this video with you guys, because I don't see myself entering back into that state, because I actually think like I grew out of it. I think that I have raised my consciousness to the point where even if I was faced with an opportunity to interpret a moment, a day, a shitty week as depression, it wouldn't even occur to me, because I understand now that that is not how I think. I've really let go of a depressed form of mentality. Am I saying now that I don't get sad and anxious and have breakdowns? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that now I don't call those depression. So something else that really helped me with managing and navigating my depression was really understanding what my depression was to me. And so I think we're so quick to judge something as so generally as depression, when it really means something for everyone. And that's something I think that's very important if you're experiencing depression, because for me, I was someone that cried 10 times a day, or I would have 10 breaks of non-crying a day because I was crying the whole time. But when I spoke to other people that experienced depression, I remember them saying they had no emotion. They felt like they were dead inside. Or there were people that had absolutely no hope, or people felt like they were grieving. I felt like I was grieving. So depression is a very personal thing. It's a very personal experience. And I think that in order for you to own this experience and allow it to be a stepping stool for healing for yourself, which is literally why this channel is called Heal with Sarah, I think that for you to use your depression as a stepping stool to heal yourself, you first have to understand what it is that really comprises your depression in the first place. And for me, having so many tears and so much crying was kind of easier because at least like that was very obviously not me. But when depression would start to warp my thinking and make me think less of myself, see less of myself and the world, that is where it got really tricky. To keep a very close eye on the ways that you find depression or any dense negativity affects your life, and really find out how it infiltrates your thinking and the angles from which it can take, because you know, depression is so sneaky. It really is. That's something I've noticed. Depression can just convince you to not give a shit even more. I do think that like it's, you know, in order for one to try to heal their depression, what worked for me was just understanding what that was in the first place. That is what I'm here to do with you guys on this channel, and I'm so excited to be sharing more with you. Thank you so much for being here with me. I love you all so much. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what more you would like to see, and also what you thought about this video. I really want to know if like anything really resonated with you. Let's just spread the healing, because I know I needed it, and I know I still need it, and I know that I'm probably never going to stop needing it, and I'm okay with that, because that is truly, I'm learning what the human experience is all about.